It is Tuesday, 1/23/18. This is week 2, day 3 of NET-136. Brief review of install. We did some CLI basics and some GUI work. Plus, we got our virtual machines from NetLab. Go look at that. I talked about documentation, making sure it was clear and turned in. Then we did some work on virtual machines. NetLab. This is the URL. We're having a few issues with that working externally. So if you're at home, make sure it's secured, HTTPS, and you can use this address to log into your virtual machine. And in that virtual machine, you can do the GUI work, which is coming up. That would be in Lab 03. And there's a part in there where you set up evolution for your email. If you get stuck on that, I wouldn't spend too much time on that, but I would do the rest of the items in there. And where you can practice those also in the lab. We'll be working on that the next session. So, things we should be doing. Of course, you have the curriculum to go through, the labs, the exams that are tied into the curriculum. Alright. And I did mention you could log in as root in the curriculum. If you want to work in, I think it's Ubuntu in the curriculum, if you want to work in the operating system, a lot of times that's very helpful to look at, experiment, explore. Next thing we talked about, we need to understand that operating systems exist in storage and they get loaded into memory. And then the instructions are performed by the processor. Inside the processor are storage areas called registers, high-speed staging areas for the processor. So we talked about the process. Well, how do we get that operating system here in the memory? Okay, well, we have a bootloader. Sometimes it's referred to booting. The name from way back was bootstrapping. So we load a little bit of software from the firmware in the computer. So let's just call that blue here. So this could be some firmware. In some devices it's in flash. So that gets loaded first. Okay. And then that has enough instructions to access the disk and load the operating system. Actually, the old BIOS, that would be a two-stage process. It would look at that master boot record and get enough information from there in order to be able to access more information in order to load the operating system. Well, most computers now use the unified extensible firmware interface. Most 64-bit machines. This is a complete boot software, if that's how you want to do that. So it can boot. It also brings in some of the features from BIOS, but this can be in the firmware. It can be loaded, and then it will boot the machine and bring in the OS in the memory. Alright. Then we talked a little bit about what operating systems do. System software, got the OS and utilities. Utilities might be like a file management software, software to check your performance, software to do all kinds of things on the computer other than applications. Oops. Other than applications. The kernel is the main processing part of the operating system, and then we have a user. And later on we'll talk about whether we're in kernel mode or user mode. Is the operating system communicating to the processor, or is it a user? What can they do? Manage your resources and manage scheduling. And scheduling has a lot to do then with multitasking. This over here, these are just a review of the work servers. We talked a little bit about the file system. We need to understand what it is, and we need to be able to navigate it. We talked about various file systems. FAT was a 16-bit, then we had FAT32, and then we had new technology file system, NTFS. Linux has its own file system separate from these. These are from Windows. And we started then doing some commands. Change directory, go to the top of the file system. This would go to your home directory. We clear the screen. We do a listing, we do a long listing. This is an alias for the long listing. We went to the home. This would be a subdirectory. And that change directory, this goes to the top of the hierarchy. We go home, and then we looked a little bit at the file structure. We actually typed in the tree command, which will show you the file structure from wherever you at, straight down. If we look here, here were the commands we actually typed in. And let me just browse through these. Here I logged in as root. Here was a clear. This showed who was on. This showed us some of the files. It actually showed us some summary information about the file structure. This is a change directory. Change directory to the top of the hierarchy, which you know, like if you had a file system, that would be right up here at the top. Then you'd have directories, and then under directories you have subdirectories, and then you might have a subdirectory, and so forth. It's a listing. Clear the screen. Did a listing again. That's a long listing. This right here, I demonstrated an alias that I have set up. We'll talk more about that actually later on. Change directory to the home directory. That's where it lists all the users. That's a long listing. I changed to group 10 as an example, so it went to home and group 10. So group 10 must be a subdirectory under home. And this took us to the top of the hierarchy. Here's where I typed tree, and we looked at that. So forth. I got this listing by typing history. Alright. So, we need to be conscious of doing the work in the curriculum. Working through the chapters, there's due dates and so forth in there. We're working on the labs. We should have completed lab 1, 2 for install, and 3 we're going to do work at the GUI. And we'll get started on that on Thursday. Okay. we should be able to access our virtual machine. We should be able to access the work servers. And pretty soon we'll start talking about accessing the machines in the classroom. Alright, that's it for today.